Guitar Land, Mike Hennig here. I want to talk to you today about how to start improvising, and one of the best ways to do that is using a basic blues progression. We're going to be in the key of E for this one, and a lot of players struggle with starting to improvise, and it usually is because they give themselves too many possibilities, right? They don't narrow down the notes enough, so it's really hard to be creative when you have too many options. So that's the first thing we're going to work on, is narrowing down our possible notes that we're going to use to start, and it's actually going to help us be more creative, and we can come up with some ideas, and then once we're creative in that framework, we can add more note possibilities. That's what we're going to talk about with this lesson. All right, let's start breaking down how to improvise using the blues for beginner guitar. Here we go. All right, so before we jump into the improvisational concepts, let's just review the chord progression really quick. So we're in the key of E, and we're going to use a classic blues progression. So we've got E, and then the other chords we're going to use is A7. So I like using this E to start. We got low string open, second fret on the A, second fret on the D, first fret on the G. High two strings are open. You're probably familiar with that E chord, right? To go to A, an A7, you can just move these two fingers down, and then you stretch them out. So you move your middle finger down one string, and you move your ring finger down two strings. You might have done A7 like this before. Remember, it's just your regular A without the middle finger down, right? And I just like doing it this way because then I can just go back and forth from E to A7 very easily, right? It's kind of like a Doc Watson way to do it. Right? And then B7 is you take your ring finger and move it down one, and your index finger and move it up one string, right? And then you add your pinky on the second fret of the highest string. I always think of my chord changes in relation to my home chord, E, right? So we have E, A7. So I'm making it the easiest switch going back and forth. And then I just flip these two fingers. See how this finger stays down? Okay, so those are the chords we're going to use. So let's just listen to the practice track really quick, and I'll do a single strum on each chord so you can hear the changes. This is also just good ear training practice, okay? I'll call them out. So we're going to start with a little blues turnaround.
2, 3, 4.
E, and then here comes B7. And now we have E, this is the start. A. You can throw a little E7 in here if you want to take off your ring finger. A. A. Back to E. So a couple measures of A there. E for a couple measures. And then we have B7. A. Back to E. And then up to that B. Starts over. E. A. E7 if you want. A. Back to E. B7. A7. E. Let's add some more strumming. B7 one more time. A. E. A. A. Back to E. B. A. E. All right, so that's really good ear training practice. So even if you can't hear all the changes right away, or maybe you don't know exactly what chord is going to next, see if you can listen to when a chord is changing. Even if you don't know which one it's going to yet, see if you can hear that the chords are changing, right? That's the first step. Second step is obviously getting it to the right chord, but that's the progression we're going to use. One thing that trips a lot of people up with improvising is basically they don't put themselves in a small enough box to start. They leave the whole fretboard too wide open, and then they get confused or overwhelmed. I know that's what happened to me, right? If you just say, play anything, play any note, it's like, it's kind of overwhelming, right? So what you want to do is put yourself in a small box at first. Maybe you just pick 1 or 2 notes to start with, right? And then you can basically break those boxes down over time, add more notes, and then eventually the whole fretboard becomes possible. But again, it's overwhelming at first if you add too many options. So what we want to do is narrow things down at first. It's actually going to help us be more creative, and then over time we can add more possibilities. So without even thinking of any scales to start, because that can even be overwhelming with too many notes, let's just take it really easy and do what's called improvising with the chord tones. So basically, instead of strumming, right, on a chord, we could also theoretically play those notes each one at a time. So those notes are called chord tones because those are the notes, the tones that make up that chord, right? So I'll include these in the tab for reference, but basically anywhere you play an E chord, those are the chord tones. So there's a lot of possibilities of where to play E on the guitar, right? But anywhere you're playing an E chord, you're using chord tones of E, okay? So that's a really easy spot to start, is just play the chord tones of each chord, okay? And what you can do to, if you want to spice it up a little bit, is 2 things. One is add some rhythm. So again, you don't have to just play, you could play, right? So add a little bit of rhythm. The other thing you can do is always like slide from 1 string below. A lot of times you can play an open string and then play onto the chord tone. It doesn't always work depending on what key you're in, but it's a good thing to try. Like that. Right? So let's put the track back on and I'll use those chord tones. The other thing we want to remember about improvisation at first is we don't want to be the player and the critic at first because it's going to impede our learning. We need to just be the player, allow ourselves to experiment and have some fun and not be too judgmental. And over time, we can become more critical of what we're actually playing, but you don't want that to stop your progress because you're too critical right off the bat. It's especially for adults, this is a very common thing, is they think, oh, well, I can't come up with anything, so I'm not going to play anything, right? You need to start kind of playing some nonsense, and then over time, it's going to make more sense. Okay, so let me pop on the practice track again, and I'll just use kind of those basic chord tones, and then I'll expand out to some other chord shapes using E, A, and B, and we'll see how, without even using any notes outside of those, we can come up with some cool stuff. Here we go, I'll let the little intro play, and then we'll go. Chord tones only, here we go. E. A, E. Kind of thinking little phrases. A. It's fine to leave a little space too, right? Let the rhythm play. B. A. Back to E. B. E. A. Right, back to E. Here, see if you can hear the changes. What's coming next? Here comes B. A. E. So obviously we're staying pretty safe at first, right? And remember, the goal is not to come up with some amazing idea at first. You just got to get started. You're starting to work on hearing those changes, playing in rhythm. You know, you're working on a lot of things, coming up with creative ideas. So this is really good practice, right? You're working on a lot of things simultaneously, whether you know it or not, right? So it's really good practice. Okay?